Welcome. It is good to be in worship together. I'm the Reverend Innis. It is my great joy to be the minister with the members and friends, children and youth of all ages and at all stages of life. And I want to begin in this moment with our land acknowledgement and saying a little bit more about that on this occasion, since it is part of what we're recognizing this morning is Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, our land acknowledgement is something we offer with every service, with every worship. And I want to share a little bit about where this came from and excerpts from an article in the newsletter from Dave Wyman in about 2013. So we're in the Wayback Machine for this morning. At the 2012 General Assembly, the UUA overwhelmingly adopted a resolution to repudiate the doctrine of Christian discovery. It also directed the leadership and individual congregations of the association to take steps to dismantle the concepts of the doctrine, eliminate its influence in our laws and regulations, and to build affirmative relationships with the Indigenous peoples in our nation and around the world. We know exactly the peoples whose lives were so severely affected by the Europeans. And they are not shadows of some past civilization. They are alive, as recognized as a sovereign nation today. And the descendants of the Peoria, whose ancestors first greeted the Frenchmen as they disembarked from their canoes in the Illinois River, those descendants are not gone. We cannot deny the legacy we share with the Peoria. We are on their ancestral soil. We are caught in the interdependent web of life that transcends centuries between the last Peoria who stood here and where we gather at this moment. And so there can be a simple statement of recognition and respect, and it could be such as, peoples of the Peoria Nation, as we begin our worship service, let us recognize and respect the peoples of the Peoria Nation, whose ancestors welcomed and assisted the first Europeans to visit the Peoria's traditional homeland, the very ground upon which we gather this morning. Our mission includes promoting the freedom of the human spirit, extending love and welcome to all, and growing into the best that we can be, and doing our part to help with the healing of the world. Our land acknowledgement is one of those tangible ways that we act and live out that mission. We invite Nancy Rakoff.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Rakoff, the about-to-be retired membership coordinator of this beloved community, a community which is vibrant, varied, and growing in our understanding of the important things in life. Speaking of retiring, there is an opening for the membership coordinator job at 18 hours a week, and the new congregational life coordinator job also at 18 hours a week. If you are interested in working at a job with meaning and fulfillment and among very nice people, I suggest you apply, and you can do that through Indeed.com. Let me remind you that the church board is hosting a congregational listening meeting immediately after the worship service, and this is about the pandemic and our response to it as a church. Your input is desired. Just remain in the sanctuary, or if you are at home, stay on the Zoom link for this worship service. The life of this church is supported by our donations and our pledges. For those here in person, the offering plate is at the back of the sanctuary. For those who are joining us virtually, please see the slide on how to donate online. We thank you all for your generosity, for being in this beloved community, and your concern for other people and the world. Thank you.
We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the birds, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love. To listen to love as a flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the sky, it tells us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love. To listen to love as the children raise all their faces to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the trees, they tell us. We are here to be lifted in love. Look at the seas, they tell us. We're here to be lifted in love. To listen to love as the flower raises its face to the sun. We are all one, here to be lifted in grace and love.
From the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennyson, The Heart of Our Faith. What is it that calls you here, that calls you onward, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? What is it that gives you the power to make that change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? It is relationship. It is the beating heart of our faith. It begins when we share this hour, our truths, this air, our hearts. Come and let us worship together. For our chalice lighting, it comes to us from the Reverend Rebecca Savage. And we light our chalice We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love, thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold the whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us the spirit of humanity. May it ignite in us the radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice lights a light into our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. This is the lighting of our chalice. And I appreciate all the Franklins for helping with the lighting this morning. Our next music is a recording from our choir. The choir's back! In our first new video for this year. So join me in enjoying and watching Come, Come, Whoever You Are.
Come yet again. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are. Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, caravan, whoever you are. Come, caravan, whoever you are. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Good morning. Today, as we talk about a piece of history that shows an absolute lack of respect for Indigenous people in our world, I'd like to take the time to propose a new understanding of what it means to respect others. You've all probably heard the most basic lesson about respect. Treat others the way you want to be treated. This is a great life lesson, and it can carry you through lots of relationships in your life. However, I believe there's something better than the golden rule. Some might call it the platinum rule. The platinum rule says, treat others the way they want to be treated. You see, respect has many different meanings. Everyone has their own idea of what respect looks like, sounds like, feels like, based upon their unique culture, family upbringing, and much more. There may be similarities. However, how we feel respected can be very unique to each person. For example, depending on a person's culture, respect can be shown by not making eye contact when speaking to an individual. In other cultures, it's considered respectful to kiss a person that you're meeting on either one cheek or both. Although the platinum rule is an easy enough concept to understand, it may be difficult to put into practice. In order to really make it work, you have to talk with the person you're spending time with about what respect is to them. Understanding what respect means to someone else requires getting to know them well enough to understand their culture, what they've been through, and how they see the world. We live in a world where it's simply no longer enough to treat others the way that we want to be treated. The golden rule can actually be used as an excuse to treat others in a disrespectful way. How many times have we heard someone say, well, that wouldn't bother me? Or, I don't find that disrespectful. Or, what's the big deal? I invite all of you to think outside of yourself and go a step further to learn about those whom you are around every day. I encourage everyone to consider adopting the Platinum Rule. Treating others in a way that is respectful to them will deepen your relationships when they realize that you care enough about them to learn about what they need and want. Aretha Franklin said it best. RESPECT. Find out what it means to me. So be it.
At this point, I want to invite the children and youth to go for their program. They are working with air today. I think there will be bubbles. Yay.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
From the 20th century, Unitarian orator and author A. Powell Davies. What are we, any of us, but strangers and sojourner forlornly wandering through the nighttime until we draw together and find the meaning of our lives together, dissolving our fears in each other's courage, making music together, lighting torches to guide us through the dark. This is the time when we, as strangers and sojourners, members and friends, come together, extend the circle of our care, and offer the joys and sorrows of our lives. And we begin with sorrow. We offer our heartfelt sympathy to Ken and Marla Serene and their family as they grieve the loss of Ken's mother, Carol Serene, from Granville, Illinois, on September 28th. We also offer our heartfelt sympathy to Larry Miller and all the other family and friends as they mourn the passing of Beverly Miller on Sunday afternoon, just last Sunday afternoon on October 3rd. We turn to wishes for health. We offer wishes for a complete and speedy recovery to Sherry Shull as she recovers from a fall and subsequent surgery. And we also offer our care and support to BJ Lindsay, whose close friend Christine is scheduled for surgery. And we turn to joy. We offer our congratulations to Brandy Watson as she graduates from the Midwest Technical Institute as a certified phlebotomist. Phlebotomist, there we are. And I want to offer one more joy from Karen Zichterman for walking in this morning and watching 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 monarch butterflies on the side of the huge butterfly bushes outside the church. This is such a joy. Thank you, Karen. And in our larger world, this week marks National Coming Out Day for folks who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and asexual, and more. And I offer a reflection from H.P. Rivers, "Blessed are the queer." Blessed are the wanderers seeking affirmation. Blessed are the worshipers praying from closets, pulpits, pews, and hardship. Blessed are the lovers of leaving family and familiarity, leaving tables where love is not being served. Blessed are those who stay. Blessed are those whose hunger and thirst for justice, they will be satisfied. Blessed are the queer, disciples of truth, living, breathing, sacred reflections of divine love. Let us hold one more moment for all the joys and sorrows, the names and milestones that are among us. There is so much that lives in our hearts and remains unspoken. I invite us all to lay that down here in this time set aside within the embrace of the congregation. Let us pause for a minute. Let us pause in the quiet as I light the candles and pause again. Amen. For our reading, in recognition of that we are honoring an aspect of Indigenous Peoples Day, we're taking up the question of the Doctrine of Discovery. And I want to offer a summary of what is this Doctrine of Discovery as offered by the Unitarian Universalist Association. The Doctrine of Discovery is a principle of international law dating from the late 15th century. It has roots in papal decrees issued by Pope Nicholas V in 1452, and that specifically sanctioned and promoted the conquest, colonization, and exploitation of non-Christian territories and peoples. Hundreds of years of decisions and laws coming right up to our own time can be traced back to this doctrine of discovery. Laws that invalidate or ignore the rights, sovereignty, and humanity of Indigenous peoples in the United States and around the world. In 1823, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Johnson versus McIntosh that the discovery rights of European sovereigns had been transferred to the new United States. Might have rejected the sovereign, but liked the doctrine. The United States, then, have unequivocally acceded to that great and broad rule by which its civilized inhabitants now hold the country. They hold and assert themselves the title by which it was acquired. They maintain, as all others have maintained, that discovery gave exclusive right to extinguish the Indian title of occupancy, either by purchase or conquest, and gave also a right to such a degree of sovereignty as the circumstance of the people would allow them to exercise. Associate Justice Joseph Story, a Unitarian, I will say, later wrote, infidels, heathens, and savages, they, the Indians, were not allowed to possess the prerogatives belonging to absolute, sovereign, and independent nations. This is where that doctrine comes from. Here ends the reading. And now I invite us into a moment of reflection and meditation with music. From my colleague, the Reverend Kristen Harper. I do not wish to breathe another breath if it is not shared with others. The breath of life is not mine alone. I brought myself to be with you, hoping that by inhaling the compassion and the courage and the hope found here, I can exhale the selfishness, the fear, the separateness I keep so close to my skin. I cannot live another moment, at least not one of joy, unless you and I find our oneness somewhere among each other, somewhere between the noise, somewhere between and within the silence of the next breath. Dr. Harper is the senior minister with the Unitarian Church in Barnstable, Massachusetts. She is the first woman of African descent to be settled at a Unitarian Universalist Association congregation through our regular search process. And as a minister and as a woman of African descent, she is well versed in the separateness and the fear of our society, our faith, and within each of us. And as a minister on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, she is close to where the Pilgrims landed now just over 400 years ago, one of those starting points in the colonization of our country as settled by entitled white folks. The breath of life is not mine alone, she reminds us. I cannot live another moment, at least not one of joy, unless you and I find our oneness somewhere among each other, somewhere between the noise, somewhere within the silence of the next breath. As we gather this weekend, close to what is becoming more known as Indigenous Peoples Day, we take up the question of how to find each other, how to discover and encounter our relationship with one another and with those who've gone before and with those we do not know, and yet we do in fact share this breath of life. We find one another because the breath of life is not marked territory and exclusive. We find one another because all life depends on it. All life depends on how we conduct ourselves within that mutuality. For our theme of cultivating relationship, last week, I asked for stories of what strengthens and supports us. Now this week, we go to one of those places, one of those kind of marked moments in history when humans sought to control others, the beginning of that, and the great harm that came from that and how it still impacts us today. There was so much in the news earlier this year of the mass graves and unaccounted for deaths of Indigenous children at the residential schools, in particular this year, the ones found in Canada. It's led to more public awareness of the Canadian and United States efforts to destroy the lives and cultures of Indigenous people on this continent. The news cycle may have moved on, but the story has not. The story continues. And learning and addressing the impact of white colonization in this country is part of our justice work in Unitarian Universalism. And justice is essential to cultivating relationship. I want to thank, in particular, Dave Wyman for his work in the Doctrine of Discovery and in bringing this conversation to the congregation way back in 2011 and 12 and 13, and also in conversation with me in preparation for today. And also thank you to those who are part of our adult education program on Thursday when we started to get into this conversation about the Doctrine of Discovery. And as the UUA says, the Doctrine of Discovery is a principle of international law dating from the late 15th century. It has its roots in the mid-1400s of sanctioned conquest, colonization, and exploitation of non-Christian territories and peoples. Hundreds of years of decisions and laws have continued from there right up into our own time that can be traced back to that doctrine that invalidated or ignored the rights and sovereignty of so many millions of people in the United States and around the world. There was that age of exploration that followed, with Christopher Columbus being one of those main figures. Land that had people who were not Christian and not white European either was available to be discovered. And Spain and Portugal and France and England and so many others were all in that effort to claim the land and all of the resources in the name of the Christian God. The people on the land, it turns out, had no rights, really. And that push for conquest was reinforced by how often the indigenous folks died from diseases that were also brought by the Europeans because there wasn't any immunity. They were not wiped out entirely in all the areas, as is often taught in U.S. history, but severely reduced. And the Pilgrims brought this doctrine when they created a shining city on a hill in Boston. Europeans coming to the East Coast treated the land as property and pushed out the people who had been there for thousands of years. And folks such as Thomas Jefferson continued to make good use of the doctrine by including it in the founding of the country to pay off the debt, the sale of land going to pay off the debt of the states in the Revolutionary War. And in 1823, the Supreme Court ruled that that practice could continue. Indigenous people were to comply or be tamed or converted to being Christian and European and to U.S. culture, most heartbreakingly and forcibly enacted by the taking of children away from their families and their communities, disrupting the lines of connection and tradition. And that continued into our own lifespans today. And I will tell you that the Unitarians were part of this federal government effort because the federal government in the late 1800s turned to religious bodies to help with this kind of conversion of the people. And the Unitarians managed schools in the late 1800s. I think there were 3 in particular examples of that. And I will offer just a glance at the records show that the Unitarians described the culture and the children no better than any other faith. Savages and heathens and unwashed and uncivilized, and that they should be converted and would have better and healthier lives because they would be converted to the European and the U.S. way of living. And that would include the elimination of their rituals, practices, language, clothing, how they wore their hair. Their entire lives needed to be erased and replaced. The impact of the doctrine of discovery continues to flow down through the years and everywhere. But in our Unitarian Universalist work, we've been taking this up in the course of the last a little bit more than a decade or so. The need for further attention for the doctrine of discovery was brought to the attention of our association leading up to the General Assembly in 2010, our annual gathering. And in 2010, we're preparing to have our General Assembly be in Arizona in 2012. And at that time, you could certainly see from afar off the immigration concerns and detention centers that were led by folks such as Sheriff Arpaio. So there was an intentional choice and a vote taken at the 2010 General Assembly that we would go to Arizona if we were going to, only if we really truly focus on justice and focus on the work, that partners that were local in Arizona, what they would ask us to do. We were trying to be accountable to folks who were there and receiving the brunt of this oppression and suffering. And those partners, those local partners, intentionally asked us to engage with, as an entire faith, the doctrine of discovery, and to be in compliance and follow and support the UN work, United Nations work on Indigenous people. And as a whole, our General Assembly did, in fact, do this. But the congregation, this congregation, also engaged with this work and studied the doctrine and its impact, how it's affected us in the long run, and is inextricably interwoven into our history and our law. And this congregation added the land acknowledgement at that time as well, that has been shared in every service since 2013. And further tried to follow through on that work by having partnerships and engagement with local Indigenous leaders and groups. And this is good work. This has been continuing, this is good work. And in this moment, we realize we need to do more. What was discovered and shared this summer in the Canadian residential schools reveals how much this is still present and ongoing and current, the suffering and the legacy, and that much needs to be addressed. And the scope of the implications of this doctrine are vast. All of our law has been affected by this, as well as our culture, as well as how we gather and see one another and don't think. We're still learning to realize it's, we have Black, we have people of color, and the people who were here before the white folks arrived, they have been suffering even longer. How do you deal with the fact that we have this entire Louisiana purchase of land? When you talk about how to make amends, what does reconciliation look like? What might even be the idea of a reparation? How to conceive of this? It is enormous. But what people are doing and can do are telling the stories of being in those schools, of surviving that experience. People are claiming and reclaiming language and culture before any more of it disappears. As I was working on this, I realized, what would be a meaningful shift? What would be a meaningful effort that a group such as this congregation could do? And I found one that came from Teen Vogue. If you have not read Teen Vogue, go find Teen Vogue, because they are speaking to our current issues and calling all of us to account. This summer, they had a article from Ruth Hopkins of the Dakota on the residential schools, and how this year had been found hundreds of unmarked graves of bodies of children as young as age 3 with no names, and the challenge of identifying and trying to return those bodies home. And what Ms. Hopkins talks about is how the truth never stays hidden forever. But what she begins the article with is how white folks have been surprised again. Oh my gosh, this is happening. This is real. There is more of this to discover. Part of our collective response in the news cycles is a collective shock and horror and awe at how deep and problematic this history is and how it keeps impacting us. That element of surprise. Wow, here's another story. How could this happen? But she also points out, guess who wasn't surprised? Guess who's never been surprised? So I want to offer that one of the best pieces of work that we could do is if white folks wouldn't be surprised. Because that surprise carries denial of the realities of the existence of this struggle and this hardship that has been happening for so long and so widespread. That we would accept the existence of oppression, generational oppression. It would be a major step just to say, we can be shocked and horrified, but let's not be surprised anymore. Because that would help us then equip ourselves, recognize the kind of recognition and listening and authenticity that would help us move forward and say, this is real, now what do we do? And then draw on our strengths and our abilities and what we want to see to move forward. This goal of this work is not to make the system of oppression disappear. I'm afraid that's not going to happen for a very, very long time. Children taken from families is generational loss, is trauma over ages and ages. And that won't be addressed until we remove the source of how it functions in our society as the basis of law and land, and that generations exist beyond that removal. Then maybe that work will be done. But we in this moment can move forward by learning and listening and grieving and owning responsibility as beneficiaries of the system. Build affirming relationships on mutual respect. Remember our core principles of the power of love and respect. And that acknowledging humanity, that by itself can be a radical act. Seeing each other as fully real and human and sovereign creatures, that is something. When the work is vast, small acts of love and respect are countercultural. And those small acts add up to become more visible and more manifest, and they make a difference to those who are trying to recover and cultivate and care for the Indigenous communities. It's not for any one of us to carry the scope of this doctrine and its terrible impact, but it is for us to listen and attend and recognize and learn as much as we can handle. From Kristen Harper. The breath of life is not mine alone. I brought myself to be with you, hoping that by inhaling the compassion and the courage and the hope found here, I can exhale the fear, the selfishness, and separateness I keep so close to my skin. Let us keep bringing ourselves to be with you and you and you and the breath of life in that exercise of that breathing that is for all. Let us go forth. Let us continue with our closing hymn, Spirit of Life. Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith. Let us keep peace in our hearts and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together, so our light will go out everywhere into the world. To be a Unitarian Universalist means we'll never be done with the work of telling the truth about oppression, the work of resisting any laws, policies, or practices that deny anyone their humanity, the work of stubbornly seeking out the spark of the divine within each of us and each other, no matter what, the work of creating heaven on earth. And to be a Unitarian Universalist also means that we are not alone in the work. We're not alone because of our promises to love one another. We're not alone because we are companions on the journey together. We grow ourselves into allies, helping one another get free, because none of us is truly free until we are all free. Our worship is ended. Let our service begin.